So thanks a lot for that introduction, Rahul. So Rahul and I talked about me going next. And one of the reasons was, Ganesh talked about a project, and I can talk a little bit more about projects around the world that Fluence is involved in. I think that's one reason. The second reason is I'm the second person who did not use Rahul's template. So, so here we go. So I hope we are the only two, and the rest have used Rahul's template. So sorry about that, Rahul. I'll change it, fix it in the right template, and send that to you. So I'm here to talk about the projects that Fluence is doing. We are, one of the world's largest battery storage company. We have been doing battery storage for about 12 years now. We have 95 megawatt scale, mostly grid-connected projects in about 20 countries. And the total megawatt size of these projects is over 1 gigawatt. And if you look at the duration of the storage, I'd say it's close to about 1.5 gigawatt hours. We have been the number one ranked, energy storage integrator in the world by Navigant Consulting. We've also been awarded as an innovative company by Fast Company. And I've just put a list of the customers that we worked with, just to give you an idea of, the kind of real businesses that we are working with, the kind of real businesses where we are, adding value across the world. People often think of this as, as Rahul said, like it's a science project. It's way beyond a science project. In fact, I would say that even 12 years ago, when we did our first battery storage project, it was not a science project, So what you're looking at is the first project. This was located at a coal power plant. And this is in the desert, and this is a mining area. And this coal power plant was primarily catering to the mining load. And what was happening was they were required to keep a regulation reserve of about 12 megawatts, which they could not utilize because that's exactly, they were keeping it for some eventuality. So we were able to convince the regulator to put in 12 megawatts of battery storage, and therefore the generator can use their full capacity and put that on the grid, right? And this was done in 2009 when the price of batteries was about $1,300 per kilowatt hour. And this made money at those prices, right? So at those prices, when we used battery to free up that regulation reserve at the generator, the project made money in 2009. So prices of battery are down to about $250. The number of instances and particular business cases where battery makes money, is in the money, are way more than they were in 2009. So I'll kind of just quickly walk you through. So the first project here is the Terra Power project. So in fact, Fluence is the technology provider for the 10 megawatt 1 hour project. Mitsubishi, AES, and Tata Power DDL, they have together kind of collaborated, and they've developed the project with Fluence being the technology provider. I think Ganesh has covered exactly what this battery is doing in their network, so I will not go into that. I'll move on to the second project. So second one is another 10 megawatt 1 hour project. This is in the Philippines. And this is also co-located at a coal power plant. And basically what this is doing is this is providing ancillary service to the Philippines grid. So in fact, this project has a 5-year ancillary services procurement agreement. And then basically it's providing frequency response service to the grid. This was the project that we did 2 years ago. We kind of commissioned this 2 years ago. Today, the Filipino grid is in the process of procuring over 1,000 megawatts of battery storage to do exactly what this 10 megawatt project is doing. And they've spread these projects all across the 3 islands that make up the country of Philippines. Here is another project which we commissioned in 2018. This is in Australia. This is about an hour from Melbourne Airport. This is an interesting one. In fact, this project was procured by the transmission company in Australia, and it was leased to the distribution company in Australia. So what they did was they've leased it, and then the distribution company is then making money out of this asset, because the transmission company, quite like in India, is not allowed to make money from energy arbitrage, right? So the distribution company leased it, and they are the ones who are kind of monetizing it. There's some capacity which the transmission company has kept back in case they need it. They've kept that capacity. The rest of it, they've leased it to the distribution company. And they're providing, its local capacity, 30 megawatts. They're bidding into the ancillary market, and if they win those contracts, they're contracting into the ancillary market. It provides a lot of strength to the network. Here's the Capex deferral project. So the only purpose why this project was done was Capex deferral. So there's a distribution company that had to service a rural community whose load was rising. They were hitting these peak load conditions that Ganesh talked about on maybe about 5 days of the year, call them super peaks, right? And there was no point for them to upgrade the entire infrastructure to service that load event that happens 5 days in a year, right? So what they did was they put a 2 megawatt 4-hour battery close to this rural community, and they did not have to incur the capex. So they will wait and watch for the community to grow, and as it grows and its demand rises, and finally if it cannot be met by this battery, then you can add another battery to it, and at some point you can make a decision to upgrade the distribution transmission network itself. Here's the project. Here's the project that's in fact owned by the utility, and they are using it as they please. So it's used. Battery storage is a very, it's a very flexible tool. It's a very versatile tool. So they have it. How this utility in San Diego is using it is, this is another Fluence project. They are charging it with abundant solar during the day, and then they are discharging it into the evening peak in the San Diego market. So they're doing it for about 4 hours every day. And they are making money out of energy arbitrage because there's a lot of cheap, abundant solar available during the day. This is where the future is headed. This is a 100 megawatt 4-hour project. This is also going to get contracted to the local utility, and the developer is keeping some of the capacity back, which they will use in the merchant market, but primarily most of the capacity is going to be contracted to the local utility. So coming into the Indian context, right? So what all applications are we seeing for battery storage? So firstly, peaking capacity, right? So there is, especially Delhi and Mumbai, we see, that we contract a little bit more expensive kind of peaking capacity, and we pay more for it. And because we are incurring the fixed cost for it, we tend to use it more than we should, right? We believe, if you have peaking condition that's not, that's like occurring like a couple of hours a day in a few days of the year, battery storage already makes a lot of sense to be used as a peaker plant. The second application we see is ramping. So currently, given how much solar we have and how much solar goes away in the evenings, we don't have the ramping capability in our coal plants to be able to ramp up as fast as the demand is rising. There isn't a resource available to a system planner in India that would be able to ramp up at the rate we are required to ramp up. And that keeps getting worse in the future. So we believe that battery is an imperative. You cannot get the ramp rates you want without a battery. You can do both of these too with energy arbitrage. Again, there's a lot of abundant solar during the day, more and more in the future, and there's going to be a lot of abundant must-sell power in the nights, because you can't run these coal plants below a technical minimum, right? So all that abundant power is going to be available cheaply and should be able to charge batteries with it and perform these critical applications that in fact cost a lot more because you're doing it at peak time with that battery. Renewable integration, again, big application for it in India. In fact, we've just, the 1200 megawatt tender just closed. That's going to be where the big volumes are going to come from. Deviation settlement, I think Ganesh talked about it. You could call it an ancillary service. Depending on you, basically your drawal depends. If your drawal doesn't match your schedule, then you are paying a penalty depending on where the frequency is. Critical power that's behind the meter. Again, there's a lot of diesel. I'm not saying battery replaces all of that diesel, but where diesel is being used to maintain a quality for power, we think battery storage can play that role much better than diesel ever can. And I think that's something that's of a lot of interest to the distribution companies as well, because a lot of their customers are dealing with diesel to deal with the peaking conditions. And lastly, Capex deferral, I talked about that earlier. So what's happening around the world? As Rahul just said, there are more, this is no longer a science project, there are over 8, this is by the way from 3 months ago, there are over 8 projects in the world that are over 100 megawatts. You can see some of this is new peaking capacity, so new peakers, then they're saying let's go with batteries instead of gas. Where there was old gas peaking capacity, they're retiring that and replacing that with battery storage. And the last thing I'd like to say is, who do you work with, right? So you want to make sure that you are working to minimize your total cost of ownership of the system, right? There are learning pains. It's not, it's complicated integrating a battery storage system. You want to make sure that the battery lasts longer, that you have lower degradation on those batteries, and you want to make sure that you are not locked into a certain technology, right? So if you use a certain battery, you want to make sure that 5 years down the road, if something better is available, the rest of your architecture should be able to support integrating a new battery that's available in the market. I think that's an important criteria. Enhancement of revenue. So rules are changing. I think in India, definitely the rules are changing. We had the Amendment 3 and then the 4, and now there's an Amendment 5 for the DSM regulations as an example. We want to make sure that the battery can be changed or reprogrammed to make the most of those changing rules so you can make that use of the revenue opportunity. And lastly, enhancing financial options. Make sure that the battery technology that you eventually deploy is something that that a bank will finance. And that's the last point I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rupam. I hope that apart from the sizes of the projects, one point which you noticed on this slide, which is about the commissioning time. There were a number of projects which were commissioned in 6 months or less. In fact, the famous Australia project with Elon Musk's Twitter wall, which started, where Elon Musk committed to deploy a 100 megawatt project in 100 days or less, or it is free. And that's not just a joke. That's something which is real, and that's a pace at which these projects can happen. So it provides a tremendous flexibility for system planners, where you don't need to guess for 10 years down the line, 5 years down the line, and start investing in projects which are going to take 8 or 10 years in development. This is something which is a lot of flexible capacity which can be deployed modularly in a distributed fashion as well. So thank you, Rupam, for those insights.